Picture the corner office down the hall. You know the one, right? It's got a title on the heavy glass door, something vague like Director of Strategic Partnerships or VP of Interdepartmental Synergies.
Oh, yeah. We all know that often.
Right. And you see this colleague constantly. They're always in meetings, they're always firing off emails, aggressively networking by the coffee machine. But if someone actually held your feet to the fire and asked you to point to a single tangible thing they produce, like a piece of code, a signed contract, a finalized product, you draw a complete blank.
Yeah, a total blank. It's just, well, a lot of motion without actual movement.
Exactly. So if you've ever looked at a setup like that and wondered what that person actually does all day, this deep dive is specifically for you. Today we're unpacking a single, really fascinating essay by Elias Kunis called The Reward Epidemic.
And it is a fascinating piece.
It really is. We're going to explore why that passing observation you had by the coffee machine is actually the first visible symptom of, like, a systemic infection. We're looking at this profound shift in how modern society views work. Basically, why jobs increasingly feel less like heavy responsibilities and much more like, prizes to be handed out.
Right, and it's a shift that creates this vague, nagging sense of unease for a lot of people in the modern workforce. Kunis manages to take that unease and, well, give it a highly precise framework.
Yeah, he really nails it down.
He does. And to really get to the bottom of the argument, we have to start with the foundational premise. Throughout human history, societies have essentially oscillated between two distinct ways of viewing what a job actually is. The first is the functional frame, and the second is the distributive frame.
Okay, let's unpack this. The functional frame first. The essay uses this brilliant thought experiment involving Aristotle's flute.
Oh, I love this example.
Right. So imagine you have a single, exquisitely crafted flute. Who should get to play it? Aristotle reasoned that you don't give it to the wealthiest person or, the most attractive person or even the person who has had the hardest life.
No, you give it to the best flute player.
Exactly. The logic is entirely output-driven. The flute exists to produce music. Therefore, the job of playing it must go to the person who can produce the best music.
Which means, when you're looking through the functional frame, a job is fundamentally viewed as a burden of competence. It is really heavy load to carry.
A burden of competence. I like that phrasing.
Yeah, think about the pilot seat in a commercial airliner. That seat only exists because a multi-ton metal tube needs to fly safely from point A to point B. The high salary, the uniform, the social prestige, none of those things are the point of the job.
Right.
They're merely the incentives. Yeah, they are the necessary bait required to attract that rare, scarce person who can actually bear the burden of keeping 300 people alive in the sky.
Okay, so the pay is just the bait to secure the competence. Got it. But then we have the second way of looking at work, which is the distributive frame.
Right. In the distributive frame, that pilot seat is no longer viewed as a terrifying burden of competence. It transforms into a highly desirable asset.
Because it comes with all those perks.
Exactly. It comes with a great income. It comes with social status, autonomy. The job itself becomes a primary good. And because it's a good, it needs to be distributed fairly among the population.
So the focus shifts completely.
Totally. If certain groups hold more of those valuable seats than others, the distributive frame doesn't see that as a byproduct of a harsh competence filter. It views that imbalance as a problem of justice.
Humans have wrestled with both of these frames for centuries, obviously. But the core tension we're exploring today is that the distributive frame has recently achieved this, epidemic spread. It is actively taking over modern organizations.
It really is.
So the obvious question is, how does a whole society catch this virus? Kunis argues this mindset infects an organization from two directions simultaneously, one from above and one from below. Let's talk about those transmission vectors.
Let's look at the top-down infection first. This is the philosophical vector. Kunis traces this back to 1971 and the philosopher John Rawls, who published a wildly influential book called A Theory of Justice.
Right, a massive book in political philosophy.
Huge. And regardless of anyone's personal politics, Kunis points out that Rawls inadvertently laid the philosophical groundwork for this epidemic. He did it by fundamentally changing the vocabulary we use to describe positions of power. Rawls categorized the powers and prerogatives of offices as social primary goods.
I want to pause on that phrase, social primary goods, because, it sounds like academic jargon, but the real-world implication is massive.
Oh, it changes everything.
It does. If you call a job a burden, people pity the person who has to do it. But if you classify a surgeon's authority or a judge's gavel as a primary good, meaning a benefit that every rational person naturally desires, you completely flip the script.
Exactly.
The job is no longer a scary responsibility, it's a luxury item. And once an office is a luxury item, handing it out becomes a question of fairness.
That semantic shift is just so critical. Rawls then introduced the principle of fair equality of opportunity. Now, on the surface, giving everyone a fair shot sounds entirely functional.
Yeah, just sounds like a level playing field.
Right. But Rawls pushed the concept much further. He argued that being excluded from high-status positions actually deprives a person of one of the main forms of human good, which is self-realization.
Wow. So the job stops being about the output. It stops being about the music the flute produces. The job becomes a vehicle for the employee's personal self-actualization.
Which leads to a really fascinating consequence. Excluding an incompetent applicant is no longer viewed as a necessary filter to protect the organization. It is now viewed as a moral harm inflicted upon the applicant's soul.
That is a wild shift in perspective.
It is. And that brings us to what Kunis calls the distributive fallacy.
What's that?
It's the widespread assumption in modern policy and corporate management that you can completely change who holds a role, based purely on who needs the reward of that role the most, without ever degrading the actual work the role produces. The job splits in two.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, there's a reward, which we redistribute fairly, and the function, which we just blindly assume will magically take care of itself.
You can see the mechanism of this everywhere, especially in, the credentialing pipeline. I mean, how did a 1970s philosophy book actually trickle down to infect modern corporate HR departments?
Through the universities.
Right. If jobs are just primary goods, then university degrees are the golden tickets required to acquire those goods. University admissions naturally become the ultimate battleground for justice. The actual competence of the graduate becomes totally secondary to ensuring they get the credential, because the credential is the key to the prize.
Exactly. But Kunis makes it clear you don't need to read dense moral philosophy to get infected by this mindset. There was a bottom-up vector, too, the empirical vector.
You don't need to read John Rawls, you just need a working pair of eyes.
This circles back perfectly to the VP of Interdepartmental Synergies you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the everyday worker. You've been grinding at your company for 3 years. Down the hall sits that VP. You have never seen them produce a single tangible asset. No code, no sales, no product designs.
Just endless meetings.
Yes, they just exist in meetings and forward emails. Yet they have a massive office and a salary 3 times yours. By any objective functional measure, that person is not performing a duty. They are occupying a reward.
What's fascinating here is that Kunis stresses, when you look at that VP and conclude their job as a prize, you are making a completely accurate empirical inference.
You're not just being cynical.
No, you aren't being cynical at all. You are correctly diagnosing a broken system.
And it's like realizing the VIP section of a club doesn't actually have better music or better drinks. It's literally just a roped-off area designed purely to signal status.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, and once you see the illusion, once you realize the VIPs aren't actually having a better time, you stop caring about the music entirely. You just start fighting to get behind the velvet rope. Once you spot one reward job in your office, the distributive frame isn't an abstract philosophy anymore. It's your lived reality.
Yep.
The immediate next thought is, well, if prizes are just being handed out for free, why shouldn't I get one?
And what's fascinating here is how these two vectors, the top-down philosophy and the bottom-up observation, lock together to create a nearly unbreakable paradigm.
They just reinforce each other.
Completely. The philosophy provides the moral vocabulary. It arms people with powerful words like equity, fair access, and representation to legitimize what they want. Meanwhile, the empirical observation gives the lived motivation. I can clearly see the meaningless job, and I want my share of the spoils.
It's a perfect trap. You can't debate the philosophy because the everyday worker can point to the useless executive down the hall as visible evidence that jobs are just prizes. And you can't dismiss the worker's demand for a prize because the moral philosophy says denying them is an injustice.
Exactly.
But this raises a glaring question. If this distributive mindset ultimately degrades actual work, if it hollows out our institutions so they can't function, why do we embrace it so quickly? Like, why doesn't our societal immune system fight it off before it takes over?
Because human biology makes us the perfect immunocompromised hosts for this specific virus.
Oh, this is the psychology part.
Yeah. The functional frame evaluating things purely on output, competence, and cold, hard physics is incredibly unnatural for human beings. It is a late, highly effortful cognitive achievement. It requires constantly fighting uphill against a full stack of defaults built deep into our brains.
Let's run through those biological defaults because the psychology here is wild. The first one Kunis mentions is our status comparison hardware.
We are primates. Our brains are sculpted by millions of years of evolution for relative status monitoring. When you see someone occupying a reward job, it triggers ancient comparison circuits.
We don't have to be taught to feel envious of unearned status. It's pre-installed wetware.
Pre-installed wetware, exactly. Then you have the fairness punishment instinct. The essay brings up the ultimatum game, which is a classic behavioral economics experiment.
Oh, right. The setup for this is simple, right? You give person A $10 and tell them to split it with person B. If person B accepts the split, they both keep the money. If person B rejects it, neither gets anything.
Right. And rational economics dictates that person B should accept a 9-to-1 split because walking away with $1 is strictly better than walking away with $0.
But cross-culturally, humans will furiously reject unfair splits. We will literally destroy value, burning the $10 just to punish a distribution we perceive as unfair.
Take that a step further and apply it to the workplace. The distributive frame hijacks this exact instinct. When we see an unfair distribution of a reward job, our reflex isn't to step back and fix the function of the company.
No, we want justice.
Right. Our reflex is to punish the distributor or demand our own cut, even if the resulting bloat destroys the overall value of the organization.
There's also a developmental default, like watch a group of young children slicing a cake. They start with strict egalitarianism. Everyone gets the exact same slice, period.
Yep, it's just automatic for them.
Understanding that someone might deserve a bigger slice because they spent 3 hours baking the cake. That merit-based, input proportional thinking is a cognitive leap that happens much later in human development. And under stress, adults rapidly regress to the child's default. Equal shares for everyone, regardless of input.
It's just easier for our brains to process.
Yeah. But, I have to admit, I want to push back a little on the final default the text mentions. Kunis calls it third-party blindness. The idea that we naturally only focus on the applicant and the employer, and we completely forget the third party, like the passenger on the plane or the patient on the operating table.
Okay, what's your pushback?
Well, I struggle to believe we just completely forget those people exist. Is it really blindness, or is it just that the applicant demanding fairness is standing right in front of us crying, while the future patient is completely abstract?
That distinction is exactly why third-party blindness is so dangerous.
Oh,
Yeah, it's not a conceptual failure. We know patients and passengers exist. It's a failure of emotional salience. The person sitting across the desk from you, demanding a fair shot at the job, has a face. They have a story. They can cry. They can complain. They can generate a lobbying group.
and the absent stakeholder has none of that.
Right. The person whose life might depend on the competence of the surgeon you hire today, they're invisible. They have no voice in the room. Kunis points out that maintaining the functional frame requires prioritizing the needs of a ghost over a living, breathing person sitting in front of you.
Wow, yeah. Which perfectly explains the concept of salience asymmetry. One highly visible, highly annoying executive with a fake job is infinitely more memorable to our primate brains than 100 invisible functional jobs working perfectly in the background to keep the electricity grid running.
Exactly.
So understanding that our brains are practically begging to be infected by this distributive mindset, where does the epidemic spread the fastest?
Kunis borrows a concept from epidemiology here, the reproduction rate, or the R-naught of the pathogen. He argues that the R-naught of the reward epidemic hinges entirely on one single variable,
And that is
feedback opacity.
feedback opacity, meaning how clearly and quickly failure is punished by reality.
Think about high feedback environments,
Right.
surgery, aviation, competitive sports, frontline combat. In these domains, incompetence produces an immediate, brutal, and highly visible consequence.
Right. A patient dies on the table. A plane crashes. A team gets routed on the field.
Exactly. In those environments, the pathogen cannot reproduce. The functional frame is validated by reality every single day. The R-naught is zero.
Yeah.
You cannot pretend to be a competent surgeon for very long.
But then you look at low feedback environments, bureaucracies, HR departments, corporate strategy divisions, certain administrative layers of academia. Here, incompetence is diffuse, it's delayed, it's highly deniable.
It's incredibly deniable.
It's exactly like playing a video game without a score counter or a game over screen. If there is fundamentally no way to visibly lose the game, you can pretend you're an expert player forever.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, and because no one can mathematically prove you're bad at it, anyone else standing around can legitimately demand that you pass them the controller so they get a turn. The reward job can exist indefinitely without correction, and every single one becomes a new transmission event for the virus. The R naught skyrockets.
That video game analogy highlights the danger perfectly. Because there is no game over screen, bureaucracies naturally generate these reward jobs over time. Administrative bloat, vague consultant roles, sinecures. Observers correctly identify them as reward.
Pretend then they want one too.
Right. Those infected observers demand their fair share. And here is the critical mechanism that Kunis calls the historical ratchet effect. Political pressure then creates more reward jobs to satisfy that new demand.
Because what's the alternative? If a VP has a useless job, the functional, logical answer is to just fire them and eliminate the job entirely. But in a massive bureaucracy, eliminating a job creates an enemy.
It creates a vocal, angry enemy. But taking that useless job and distributing it to a new demographic creates a loyal beneficiary. Political systems, by their very nature, optimize for creating beneficiaries.
So the loop just ratchets forward.
It does. And Kunis points out that this isn't a new phenomenon at all. We can look back at the Ancien regime in France, where the government literally sold state offices for cash. Judgeships and military commissions were treated as private property that you could inherit, trade, or rent out.
The actual competence of the judge didn't matter in the slightest. The crown just wanted the revenue from selling the prize, and the buyer wanted the social status.
It took Napoleon's violent revolution to shatter that system and reassert the functional frame. He established the concept of careers open strictly to talent, where promotion was based on battlefield competence, not aristocratic blood.
But Kunis notes that this aggressive return to functional competence was fragile, right?
Very fragile. It only lasted about a century before the natural human default, the distributive frame, began creeping back into French institutions under new moral vocabulary.
So what does all of this mean for us today? What happens when the virus completely takes over an organization or even an entire society?
Kunis calls this terminal stage the endemic equilibrium. It's the point where the disease has so thoroughly permeated the host that it actually presents as health. The immune response itself is treated as the disease.
Wow, okay.
Demanding functional competence is actively reframed as malicious gatekeeping. Objective selection criteria, like standardized exams or strict output metrics, are fiercely attacked as artificial barriers designed solely to prevent fair distribution.
In this equilibrium, the word meritocracy transforms from an ideal into a slur. Anyone still holding onto the functional frame is diagnosed with a moral deficiency. They're accused of elitism or, protecting toxic hierarchies. Kunis offers a really sharp diagnostic test to see if a society has reached this stage. You just have to observe which jobs people are fighting over. We hear constantly about the glass ceiling, the intense demand for equity and high-status, comfortable rewards like corporate boardrooms, venture capital firms, tenured professorships. But nobody's protesting about the glass cellar.
And the glass cellar represents the high-risk, physically demanding, invisible functional jobs that keep society running.
Right. You don't see massive social movements demanding demographic equity in sewage maintenance or deep-sea fishing or roofing in the middle of a sweltering summer.
No, you certainly don't.
Because if the underlying goal of these movements was truly to share the heavy burdens of maintaining society fairly, we would see fierce fights over those jobs. But we don't. Because the underlying motivation isn't functional. They aren't trying to share burdens, they're distributing prizes.
This raises the ultimate question of the essay. If this virus is so deeply ingrained in our primate psychology, and so thoroughly protected by our modern moral vocabulary, how do we fix it?
Well, can we just sit these executives down and debate them out of this mindset? Can we just, explain that their jobs are fake?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can't defeat this pathogen with arguments. The bottom-up vector is based on true empirical observation. You cannot talk someone out of what they could literally see with their own eyes down the hall.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Telling an employee that jobs are sacred duties falls entirely flat when they watch their VP forward emails and attend networking lunches all day.
Because they can see the fake jobs. The lived reality beats the theory. So we have to change the environment itself. We have to somehow bring back the game over screen to the video game. Make failure hurt again.
That is what Kunis calls the architectural vaccine. You have to change the physical structure of the organization.
Okay, how?
First, you need incredibly tight feedback loops. You must connect output directly to consequence. Free markets do this naturally through the brutal threat of bankruptcy. Sports do this with a scoreboard. Bureaucracies, on the other hand, systematically dismantle these loops to protect themselves.
So you have to reintroduce that market pressure. And I imagine you also have to permanently attach outcomes to the actual names of decision makers, named accountability.
Public, inescapable accountability. When consequences are public and unavoidable, a fake job suddenly transforms from a comfortable prize into a massive liability.
Yeah.
No one wants to be the director of strategic partnerships if they are going to be personally, publicly fired when a partnership fails to generate revenue.
And finally, you have to eliminate opacity. The pathogen reproduces in darkness. It thrives in vague job descriptions, endless strategy meetings, and shared responsibility matrices where no one is actually to blame.
Exactly.
If every single role in a company is forced to demonstrate measurable, tangible output on a regular basis, the reward job literally has nowhere to hide. It is forced into the blistering light of day.
It is a sobering, slightly terrifying conclusion. Kunis leaves us with the realization that the functional frame, where we prioritize competence, output, and reality, is actually a historical anomaly.
It's an exception, not the rule.
Right. It's a fragile, unnatural achievement that requires immense, exhausting effort to maintain. The distributive frame, the desire for prizes, is our default human setting.
Tomorrow, when you walk into your workplace or log on to your next video call, I want you to look around. Ask yourself, where is physics or the market enforcing harsh consequences here? And where is the feedback so delightfully opaque that a reward job is just hiding in plain sight?
It's great exercise.
It really is. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the essay's core theme. Kunis notes that maintaining a functional frame requires active defense against entropy, exactly the same way maintaining complexity in physics requires a constant input of energy. If the distributive frame treating jobs as prizes is the natural human default, perhaps every human organization has a natural, unavoidable expiration date.
That's a chilling thought.
Without the constant, painful, terrifying introduction of visible failure, organizations might be biologically destined to eventually collapse under the weight of their own accumulated reward jobs. Maybe they simply require a catastrophic reset, a total systems failure, before they can remember how to function again. Something to mull over during your next interdepartmental synergy meeting. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.